Welcome back to Organized, the business law breakdown. I'm Seth C. Orenberg, and today we're diving into an issue that shapes every contract. What counts as a real offer? Without an offer, there cannot be a contract. But not every statement, advertisement, or negotiation leads to a legally binding offer. Think about this. Imagine you see an advertisement for an incredible deal, like a fur coat for $1, or maybe even a military Harrier jet just for some Pepsi points. Can you really walk into that store or send in your Pepsi points and expect to walk away with those items? Today, we'll find out. Last time, we talked about promises, when a simple statement becomes a legally enforceable commitment. But promises and offers are not the same. Before we can even get to a contract, we need to know if a valid offer was made. Was the language clear enough? Did it show a real intent to be bound? In today's episode, we'll explore what qualifies as an offer, what doesn't, and why it matters. We'll look at cases like Lefkowitz and Leonard versus PepsiCo, where the courts decided whether a statement or an ad could create a contract. And of course, we'll break down these principles to see how they play out both in everyday life and in pop culture. Stick around if you've ever wondered how a simple statement can lead to a binding contract, or if you're just curious whether that wild ad you saw is enforceable. We're about to break it all down. When we talk about offers in contract law, we're really discussing one of the most important building blocks of a contract. A contract is the manifestation of willingness to enter into a bargain made in such a way that the person receiving it, the offeree, understands that their acceptance will create a binding contract. But not everything that looks like an offer is legally enforceable. Here's how the Restatement Second of Contracts defines an offer. An offer is the manifestation of willingness to enter into a bargain so made as to justify another person in understanding that their assent to that bargain is invited and will conclude it. What does that mean? Essentially, if the offeror makes a proposal and the offeree believes they can accept that proposal and create a contract, you've got a real offer. But here's where it gets tricky. Not everything that looks like an offer actually is one. Preliminary negotiations are a good example. You know, those back and forths before you finalize a complex deal. In contract law, these early discussions don't create any legal obligations. They're simply conversations. They're steps on the road to a possible contract. They're not binding in themselves. For example, imagine a lumber company says to a farmer, "Would you consider selling your land for $50,000? Is that an offer? Probably not. The farmer can't just say, "Sure, we have a deal," and create a binding contract. Why? Because that statement looks more like a question, part of a preliminary negotiation, an invitation for offers or for further negotiations. It doesn't look like a definitive offer. It doesn't look like a clear intent to be bound by specific and definite terms. One of the critical factors in determining whether something is an offer is certainty. Courts need to know what the parties are actually agreeing to do. This means the terms must be clear. Who are the parties? What is the subject matter? What's the quantity and price? These elements need to be specific enough for a court to enforce the contract. If the terms are too vague or too ambiguous, there's no offer. Let's say Maestro offers to give Novice 3 hours of piano lessons for $100. That's probably a real offer. Why? Well, the terms are reasonably certain. We know who the parties are, Maestro and Novice, what's being offered, piano lessons, how long the lessons will be, 3 hours, and how much they cost, $100. Courts could enforce this agreement. On the flip side, if Maestro simply says, "Hi, Novice, I'll teach you piano sometime if you're interested," that would not be an offer that could be accepted. It's too vague. It's not enforceable. Now, let's talk about advertisements. You've probably seen countless ads, but did you know that most advertisements are not actually offers? they're usually considered invitations to negotiate or invitations for bids. For example, if a store puts out a flyer that says 50% off on all shoes, that's not an offer. It's an invitation for you to come in and make a purchase. But there are exceptions. Take the famous case, Lefkowitz versus Great Minneapolis Surplus Store. In that case, the store published an ad for fur coats, $1 for the first 3 people to show up on Saturday morning. Because the ad was so specific, it included price, quantity, and terms like first come, first served that identified the parties that could accept it. The court held this was an offer. It was not just an invitation to negotiate or to make a bid. The store couldn't refuse to sell the coat to the first customer who followed the ad's terms. Why does all of this matter? Because a valid offer creates the power of acceptance in the offeree. If there's no offer, there can never become a contract. But if there is an offer, we now have the possibility of accepting it and creating a contract. Understanding the difference between an offer and preliminary negotiations, especially with regard to advertisements, is key to knowing when you've entered into a legally binding agreement. Let's break it down with some real-world cases. First up is Lefkowitz versus Great Minneapolis Surplus Store. This is a classic case when it comes to understanding when an advertisement becomes an offer. Here's the situation. A store ran an ad that promised 3 new fur coats worth up to $100 each for the price of $1, with the key language, first come, first served. Seems like a bargain, right? On the first day of the sale, Mr. Lefkowitz shows up first in line with his dollar bill in hand. But the store refused to sell him the coat. The store claimed they had a house rule that the sale was for women only. Mr. Lefkowitz demanded the coat and eventually sued to acquire it. The court didn't buy the store's argument and awarded the value of the coat to Mr. Lefkowitz. Why? Well, the ad was an offer. The ad was specific enough to be considered an offer because it listed the subject matter, fur coats, the price, $1, the quantity, the first 3 people or 3 coats, 1 per person, how to accept the offer, first come, first served. It had enough definiteness or certainty to be an offer that could create a contract. Mr. Lefkowitz did exactly what the ad required to accept the offer, and so the store was legally bound to sell him the coat. They weren't able to change it after he accepted it because once an offer has been accepted, which in this case was when Mr. Lefkowitz presented the dollar, it has become a contract, and a contract can't simply be changed by one party. Contracts are binding. This case highlights the importance of certainty and intent in an offer. The court found that the terms of the ad were so specific, they left nothing open for negotiation, making it an enforceable offer. The lesson here is if an ad or communication is clear, definitive, and explicit, like specifying a limited quantity and who can accept it, even an advertisement can rise to the level of a legal offer. Let's contrast this with the infamous case of Leonard versus PepsiCo. This case involved a commercial where Pepsi advertised its Pepsi Stuff promotion. One of the items jokingly included in the commercial was a military Harrier jet, which you could get for the price of 7 million Pepsi points. And for context, you could get Pepsi points by buying a can of Pepsi or giving Pepsi 10 cents. So this was effectively $700,000 for a military jet, which was worth multi-millions of dollars. Plus, it's a military jet, not available to the general public. Leonard, a college student, saw the commercial and actually set out to collect those Pepsi points or buy them outright. He actually brought a venture finance group together to raise the $700,000 to buy the Pepsi points and get the jet. Collected the money, sent in the Pepsi points, and Pepsi, lo and behold, refused to give him the jet. The student sued, claiming that the ad was an offer. Here's where things get interesting. The court ruled that the commercial wasn't an offer. Why? The Pepsi ad was clearly meant as a joke. It didn't include specific steps for acceptance. It didn't include serious language of commitment. In fact, there was a catalog where Pepsi stuff was listed, and there was no Harrier jet in it. In fact, the court found that no reasonable person would believe that Pepsi was truly offering to sell a multi-million-dollar piece of military hardware through a soda promotion. Instead, the ad was seen as an invitation to negotiate or an invitation for offers for Pepsi in general, but not with the promise of getting a jet in return. This case emphasizes another key point, the reasonable person standard. Courts look at whether a reasonable person would believe a communication was a serious offer. In PepsiCo, the humor and exaggeration should have made clear that no serious offer was made. So, what can we learn from these two cases? On the one hand, an advertisement can be an offer if it's clear, specific, and leaves nothing open for negotiation, as we saw in Lefkowitz. On the other hand, if the communication is vague, unclear, or clearly meant in jest, like the Pepsi commercial, then it's not an offer. Understanding these distinctions will help you avoid legal misunderstandings in both business and everyday life. Let's play a quick what if. Imagine this scenario. You see an ad in a local newspaper offering a $500 reward for finding and returning a lost dog. The ad states, first person to return the dog will receive $500. Later that day, you find the dog and bring it to the owner. The owner thanks you but says they changed their mind and no longer want to offer the reward. Can you still claim the $500? The answer here is yes. Why? This ad is actually a unilateral offer, meaning an offer that can only be accepted one way, by performing the requested action. In this case, the action is finding and returning the dog. Once you perform that action, you have accepted the offer and performed the terms of the contract. So the owner is legally obligated to pay the reward. Unlike ads for products, which are usually meant as invitations to negotiate, ads for rewards or prizes are often offers that can be accepted through performance. Now let's switch it up a bit. What if instead of a reward, the ad simply said, we're looking for a lost dog. Please contact us if found. You find the dog, bring it back, and then ask for payment. In this case, you wouldn't be entitled to any money. Why? Because the statement lacked any clear offer. There was no promise by the owner of payment or any specific terms that invited you to enter into a contract. It's simply a request for help, not an offer to have a legally binding contract. Let's take this further. Imagine you walk by a local store and they have a sign in the window that says clearance sale. All jackets, $10. You rush inside, but when you get to the counter, the clerk says the sale was a mistake and the jackets are actually $100. Can they refuse to sell you the jacket at $10? Or can you demand to have them honor what they put on the sign? In this case, you probably cannot demand that you get a jacket for $10. Most general advertisements like this are seen as invitations to negotiate, not binding offers. The law generally assumes stores don't intend to make binding offers to everyone who sees an ad, and there's no real reward for coming into the store. If the sign had said something like, first 10 customers in the store today get any jacket on the shelf in section A4 for $10, then the store could maybe be legally bound because the ad is specific and leaves nothing for negotiation. So, the lesson here is that details matter when determining whether something is a binding offer. If there is clear language that invites action and promises a specific reward or price, it could be an offer. But if the terms are at all vague, or if it's clear the statement is an invitation to negotiate or just a comical advertisement, then it's probably not enforceable as a matter of law. Let's step out of the courtroom for a moment and dive into the world of pop culture, where contracts and offers sometimes play out in unexpected ways. If you've watched the Netflix series, Dude, Where's My Jet? You know what I'm talking about. This series is based on the case we just discussed, PepsiCo. Pepsi's commercial showed a teenager landing a Harrier jet and claimed that anyone could get one for 7 million Pepsi points. Now, in reality, no one would reasonably expect to walk away with a military jet for the equivalent of $700,000 worth of soda. But the show does a great job illustrating how far this college student was willing to go to make Pepsi pay up. The case is a great example of how advertisements and promises, especially in marketing, can create confusion about what's a real offer and what's just puffery. Pepsi's ad was clearly meant to be a joke, but the student took it seriously, which led to one of the most famous contract law cases in recent history. Now let's compare that with Liquid Death, the water company that ran a campaign promising to give away a private jet. In this case, Liquid Death played on the idea of ads being a joke, just like Pepsi did. But their point was they were more serious than Pepsi. They were careful to include all the legal disclaimers, making it clear that their offer was real. They made a point of distancing themselves from companies like Pepsi that you couldn't trust, and apparently have made a real offer to give away a jet through their contest. So it's a clever way of marketing humor, and it also goes to show that advertisements can, in fact, be offers. These examples show that even in pop culture, there's a fine line between a real offer and a marketing gimmick. Understanding the legal rules about what constitutes an offer and what doesn't can avoid messy lawsuits. Pepsi learned this the hard way. Now that we've seen how law applies to these entertaining, real-world examples, let's recap the key takeaways from today's episode. We started by breaking down the legal concept of an offer, what it is, what it isn't, and why it matters in contract law. We saw how an offer must be clear, definite, and leave nothing open for negotiation in order to be legally enforceable when accepted. Then we explored cases like Lefkowitz, where an advertisement was specific enough to be considered an offer, and PepsiCo, where humor and exaggeration made it clear that Pepsi wasn't making a real offer. In our What If segment, we learned how certain ads, like those offering rewards, can be binding offers. But generally, ads for products usually aren't offers. And in pop culture, we saw how companies like Pepsi and Liquid Death use humor in their ads. But only one of them seems to be staying on the right side of the law. The key takeaway: not everything that looks like an offer is actually legally binding. The details matter. Things like the reasonable interpretation of the party's intent, the degree of certainty in the terms, and again, the reasonable person standard play a huge role in determining whether you've got a real offer or just a casual statement. Before we wrap up, think of some advertisements or offers you've seen recently. Were any of them specific enough to be binding offers? Or were they all just invitations to negotiate? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have some examples of advertisements that you think rise to the level of offers, feel free to link them in the comments below. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out. Those comments and questions help shape future episodes and make sure I'm covering the topics that matter most to you. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast, leave a review if you're enjoying the show so far, and share it with anyone who might find it useful. In the next episode, we're diving into the topic of how long offers last. Offers, even if they are made, don't last forever. It's an issue that comes up more often than you think. So, that's all for today's episode. Thank you. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review if you're enjoying it so far, and share it with anyone who might find it useful. In our next episode, we're going to talk about how long offers last. So once you've located one, how long can you accept that offer? It comes up more often than you think, and there are surprising ways that offers can be terminated. That's all for today's episode of Organized, the Business Law Breakdown. I'm Seth C. Orenberg, and I thank you for joining me as we explore what makes an offer legally binding. I hope you found it informative and helpful. And remember, until next time, keep your agreement strong and your argument stronger.